Hello, my name is Andres, and we come to the second part of the Sabbath. Here we're going to talk about the Sabbath day journey, which is the distance you were allowed to walk even on the Sabbath day. One thing I didn't explain very well in the last episode was that, as told in Numbers 35:33, in a Levite city, Levites were priests. So Levitical cities were priestly cities or holy cities. Because they were holy cities, you shall not pollute the land where you are, because the blood defiles the land. So in a holy city, if you in vengeance killed somebody, you defile the land. The obvious corollary to that is that on a holy day, the Sabbath, if you kill somebody, you defile the holy day. I didn't make that link clear before. Now, Exodus 16:29 lays the foundation of the restrictions. It says, on the Sabbath, abide ye every man in his place, let no man go out of his place on the seventh day. But then the rabbis decided, well, I mean, that's a little too restricted. What does it mean to be in his place? And decided that his place, at least in the rabbinical cities, was the extent of the city. But the cities were gated, but they needed sustenance. They needed a place to keep their animals and to grow some wheat and stuff. So the actual extent of the city was 2,000 cubits to the northeast, south, and west of the city, which is about 1,348 feet. So you were allowed to walk on a Sabbath out of the city 1,348 feet. The question was, well, as 1,000 years passed by, did that restriction exception apply only to the Levitical cities? And then we have on Acts 1:12, Jesus Christ walking through the fields on a Sabbath. He was rebuked for his apostles eating the corn, but not because he was walking. So that means that Capernaum, which was a Roman town, certainly not a Levitical city, you could apply the exemption. You could have 1,348 feet around the city of Capernaum, or the village of Capernaum, and be okay. So what happens if you're traveling? If you're walking, or you get on your camel or your ass, mule or whatever, and start walking, you're in the middle of the boonies, in the middle of the desert, and you're on a Friday, and sunset happens, and that becomes Saturday. That's a Sabbath. Could you move from that spot? The recording of the oral traditions that's in the Mishnah tells us that wherever is it that you were on the Sabbath, at that point that becomes like a temporary residence, and then your temporary place. And then on a radius of 2,000 cubits around it, you could still walk around. You see that in Mishneh Torah Sabbath 27.4. You can access it on this link. In fact, I got it over here somewhere. Mishneh. If you go to that link, you'll see the commentary, oral commentary that was finally recorded on paper, and it tells us, similarly, a person who spends the Sabbath in an open valley may walk to the limits of a square extending 2,000 cubits in every direction from the place at which he is located at the commencement of the Sabbath. So from the moment it becomes dark That's the commencement on the Sabbath. So now we know that you have this range of motion, but it's limited to 1,348 feet. Now we can make sense of Acts 1:12, where it says that then they returned unto Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, which is from Jerusalem a Sabbath day journey. So that distance was called a Sabbath day journey, which is about 2/3 of a mile, a little less than 2/3 of a mile. We can verify it. We can go to the location of the Mount of Olives on this Wikipedia link, which is kind of cool. So we press, let me make an additional page here. So we click on that link, and he tells us the Mount of Olives, and then he describes it and whatnot, and he gives us all maps of it. But the most important part is that he gives us the coordinates. When we click on the coordinates, he gives us various options to see it. And the first one is the Acme mapper. We can click on satellite, and we see in its beautiful resolution. That's why I like it. Mount of Olives was this area right here. The coordinates it gives is this one, which is between these two large buildings. Now, this is the Temple of Jerusalem. You can access that by clicking on the second link. It discusses the Temple of Jerusalem, which you can read on your own. But the most important part is it gives you the coordinates. Clicking on the coordinates, once again, you go to satellite, and it tells you this is the Temple of Jerusalem. Now from here, you see that the wall of the city ran across here. And the Mount of Olives was over here. So the distance from here to the Mount of Olives must have been less than 1,348 feet. It's kind of difficult to measure distances. It's possible. It's difficult to do with this Acme mapper, but I like it because it's fantastic resolution. Look at those houses. You can see the individual cars. You can even see the individual people in their shadow walking around the Temple of Jerusalem. But if we use the Google Maps version, you'll see the Temple of Jerusalem is here, and the Mount of Olives is over here. Here are the two buildings that we're talking about. So if we go from the to find the measuring tool, we can go to Map, More Options, Measure. So we can measure from the edge of the city, the gated part of the city, to the Mount of Olives, which is this area over here. Let's pick the largest extent. And we see it's 2,468 feet. So clearly the Mount of Olives was within the allowed walking distance. Jesus Christ, in the last year of his ministry, never slept in the city itself. He always slept outside the city, and he slept most of the time on the Mount of Olives. And I think that was to avoid any chance of being captured. Now that we have this tool, we know how far a person could go from when for the night on their journey, and that they couldn't move, that they couldn't travel on the Sabbath. Now we can re-examine the miracle of the blind man on the pool of Siloam and get a better idea of the comings and goings of Jesus Christ. There's actually enough information in the Gospel of John to date every verse in the story that's being reported. It requires a little bit of thinking, and also you gotta realize that the Old New Testament didn't have breaks in between. It didn't have chapters. It didn't have periods. It didn't have commas. All the texts all ran together. In some cases, you might be reading a paragraph and you realize there's a logical break in between that the modern text doesn't break out with a nice header. So anyway, we already know from episode 12 that the miracle of curing the blind man occurred on Friday. But it occurred on Friday, which for us is still Friday, after sunset. Sunset happened at 5:29 p.m. Because of that, it was Saturday for them already. And we know he did it before it was dark, because Jesus says, I can't do the miracles in the dark. It has to be during the day. So dusk, the time it gets dark, is 5:54 p.m. So we know within 25 minutes when the miracle of healing the blind man happened. So if we look at the text here, as he's running out of the temple, Jesus passes by John 9:1 and sees a blind man which was blind from birth, and then heals them, and then says, go wash in the pool of Siloam. And then he went his way therefore and washed and came seeing. At that point is night already. The next paragraph, 9.8, the neighbors therefore, they which before had seen him that he was blind, said, is it not that he sat and begged? So the neighbors realized, hey, he's not blind. How do they know he's not blind? Because it was the next morning. So the logical break is that 9.8 starts the next morning on Saturday. So then we can date those verses 9.8 all the way to 10:21. What happens is the blind man gets called in by the priests. The priests rebuke him. They say, he cannot heal you in a Sabbath. That's breaking Sabbath, which is only true for their sect. It was against Jesus Christ's teaching. And the guy says, how can that be? I mean, he must be holy because he healed me. So they cast him out. What does that mean? When the temple acted as some sort of social security net. The temple is the one that provided money for the widows, the money for orphans, and the money for sick people. So if you're an invalid or a blind person, you usually got your food from the temple. And when they cast you out, you're cut off. And it's basically a death sentence. Jesus Christ heard about it, and he went to the temple to confront the priest and say, hey, what happened? The reason he could do that, and the reason he could enter the temple, where surely they wanted to put him to death for what he did, was because it was Saturday. They couldn't capture him. They couldn't arrest him because that's work. You can't do work during Sabbath. So there's a long conversation and a long talk. And on verse 10:29, 10:21. Let's see. Let's find it here. Ends the report. Basically, after he had the confrontation with the priest, Jesus Christ left Jerusalem because it was the end of all the festivities. More than likely, he went to Bethany beyond the Jordan, where his friends and family lived. But we don't know. He could have gone directly back to Capernaum in Galilee. So now we know all the verses from, I think it was 9:1 to 10:21. We have dated them. We know exactly on which days he was there and which days he said something. Now we can work backwards. The one before, let's see, 9:1 tells us that, where is it? Before 9:1 is when we're told the story about the adultery. Jesus Christ was praying at the temple and preaching at the temple on the 8th day of the festivity, which is a Holy Convocation Day. The festivities are already ended on the 7th day, what they call the Feast of Tabernacles. So we know it was not a Saturday because first they attempted to kill the adulterous woman, and later they took offense to what Jesus Christ was saying. He was saying his soul predated Abraham, and they didn't like that, so they took stones and tried to kill him. But that happened right before sunset, so they stopped chasing him when sunset happened. So all that happened from 8:2 to 8:59. So let's go to 8:2. So this is the beginning of the day. The prior day was the last day of the feast, and Jesus went into the Mount of Olives. On 8:2 was the early morning of Friday, and he went back into the temple. And here's where the woman was taken into adultery. And later, 8:59 is when they took up stones to cast him and to kill him. So now we're at the beginning of Friday, and we're going into Thursday. So the evening of Thursday is every man went into his house, and Jesus went into the Mount of Olives. Now, Jesus, like I explained, Jesus could, in the later years of his ministry, he was a wanted man, and he didn't feel safe sleeping in Jerusalem itself, inside the gates. So his habit was to walk to the Mount of Olives and sleep there. So we can assume that every night that he was at the temple, he would walk out and sleep at the Mount of Olives. So 7:53 to 8:1 is when he went to sleep. So the night before, slept at the Mount of Olives, 7:53 to 8:1. So we can go further back and figure out when the last day of the feast started. And we see that it happened on 7:37, where John says, on the last day, that great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried, "If any man thirsts, let's come to me and drink." So we are going back in time, and we know that Jesus Christ was there on Thursday. October 16th of 32 AD, which was Tishrei 21st. We can see it here, 737. And this is what I was talking about. There's no break. There should have been a logical break right here because this is a new day. But what's described before that is a conversation of the Pharisees talking to the officers saying, we want to arrest him. So they wanted to arrest him the day before Thursday. They wanted to arrest him on Wednesday. So we know Jesus Christ there was on Wednesday. For example, 732, heard the people murmured, and the Pharisees and the chief priests sent officers to take him. So if he's there on Wednesday, does he say if he was there a day before that, or is he, or he doesn't say? So it could be Wednesday or any day before Wednesday. All we know is that Jesus arrived in the midst of the feast. That means he arrived after the feast began, but before the feast ended. Some text says in the middle of the feast, implying that it was, 3 or 4 days after the feast started, but the information that we have does not match that. So we know that he arrived in the midst of the feast to the temple and taught. Our goal now is then to determine when did he arrive to the feast, and I'll show you how to do that next. Let me see. Yeah. When did Jesus arrive at the feast? And he arrived in the midst of the feast. We can now start putting some numbers on paper here. We know that Jesus lived in Capernaum. He moved there at the end of his first year of ministry. As Matthew tells us, he came and dwelt in Capernaum. Now he's telling us that he was beyond the Jordan in the Galilee of the Gentiles. So there was a Galilee, which was the country of tetrarchy of Herod Antipas, and there was Galilee of the Gentiles, which was the tetrarchy of Philip. John tells us at the very beginning of the story we're looking at that Jesus walked in Galilee, for he would not walk in Jewry, because the Jews sought to kill him. That's what the King James Version of the Bible translates to. But if we look at the interlinear Bible verses for that verse, we see that after these things, Jesus walked in Galilee and not in Judea. You can see here Judea to walk, because the Jews want to kill him. So this tells us that he wasn't really the Jewry. Like, for example, Galilee of the of Antipas would be the Jewish Galilee, but it's referring to Judea, the country of Judea, which used to be the ethnarchy of Archelaus before he was kicked out. We gotta realize all these things were in different countries. You have the country of Galilee from Herod Antipas. You have the country of Philip. You have the Decapolis, which was a Greek independent country called Decapolis because he had 10 major Greek cities. You have the country of Perea, which was right across the Jordan from Judea. And then you have Judea. But Judea itself had two different parts. The top part was Samaria. In Samaria did not follow the orders of the Temple of Jerusalem. They had their own people, and they're constantly clashing with the Jews from the temple. So if the Jews of the temple wanted to catch Jesus Christ, he could cross over the Jordan to Perea, a different country, where the temple didn't have jurisdiction. They could go up north to the area of Samaria and try to hide there, even though the Samaritans probably would look askew at him. He could go further and try to hide in the country of Galilee, but Herod Antipas at the end had a great enemy, was his enemy. Or the only country that was truly safe was the ethnarchy of Philip. He didn't stay in the Decapolis area because there are no Jews there. They're all Greeks. So he could not preach to any one of them. In any event, it's important to know where he started the trip. So he started from Capernaum. And then when we look at the map, Capernaum is either here or here. For these purposes, it really doesn't matter. The difference is too small. I'll show you how to figure it all out. So, taking this route and going straight to the Temple in Jerusalem, which is here. You can see the temple right there. It's 86 miles. So he would have to walk 86 miles. He was mostly walking since throughout the entire, all the reports about his doings didn't ever mention him going on an ass, except briefly for the time that he entered Jerusalem on the last week of his life. So we have 86 miles. People normally walk around 3 miles an hour. That means there are about 28.7 hours that he had to walk. Assuming that he was really pushing it, walking 8 hours a day, 4 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, that would be 3.6 days that it took him to go from Capernaum to the Temple of Jerusalem. If we look at our calendar, we see that the first of the Feast of Tabernacles started on Friday, but he couldn't leave on Friday. As we had mentioned, you couldn't travel on Saturday. And it was so onerous and so difficult to make camp. You couldn't even make camp on a Saturday. You couldn't do anything. Starting a travel where a Saturday will be in the middle of it was avoided. So Jesus would start travel on Sunday, the day after the Saturday. So he will travel 1, 2, 3 days, and then half of day 4. So he arrives at the temple on Wednesday. So he probably arrived around noon or around 1 in the afternoon. He went into the temple, and as we did saw from the prior analysis, the priests tried to arrest him. So now we have, with a great degree of certainty, established what Jesus did and what verses correspond to what he was doing. Now, the disciples going to the temple is a little more less certain, more difficult to do, and that's because there is a Day of Atonement right after Saturday. The Day of Atonement was a day of prayer, a day of fasting, a day of reflection. It's a holy day, a holy convocation day. So you won't travel on that day. So normally they will start on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 3 days, and arrive on Thursday, right before the First of the Tabernacles. But the problem I see with that is that when they're discussing, should we go or not go, and then Jesus Christ tells them, you go, but I'll stay. There is no mention at all of the Day of Atonement. If you're talking about that the day before, they would be talking about it on the Day of Atonement. It's not mentioned at all. So what I propose, and I think what happened, is that since they were in Galilee, and they were Galileans, they celebrated the Day of Atonement on the Galilean day for the Day of Atonement. As you can see, the new moon for the Galileans was 2 days before the new moon for the Temple of Jerusalem. So that would mean that this will be shifted over here. They will celebrate the Day of Atonement on Friday. On Saturday, they will discuss the travel. And then they will travel at a much more leisure pace, probably taking 4 or even for perhaps 5 days, arrive at the temple. So I believe, I propose that this is what happened, since the Day of Atonement is not mentioned as being right at the beginning of the trip, is because the Day of Atonement was celebrated in the Galilean fashion, on the Galilean Day of Atonement. So if we go back to the verses in the Gospel of John, we see here that after these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, because he couldn't walk in Judea because the Jews tried to kill him. The Feast of Tabernacles was at hand, so that means they're talking about it a week before. And then his brethren said unto him, depart hence and go to Judea. So that would be on Saturday. So we can date these verses on Saturday. So the verse from 7:3 to 7:9 is on Saturday. And we've done it. We have completely dated every verse on the Gospel of John from 7:1 to 10:21. Now, looking at the Gospel of John, the next verse is 10:22. And it says, he was at Jerusalem, the feast of dedication, and it was winter. So you see that several months passed, or maybe longer, between the report of one of the activities of Jesus Christ and the next one, which was the feast of dedication, which was Hanukkah. So Jesus wanted to celebrate Hanukkah. If we knew that the Gospel of John was chronologically in order, there's only 1 year in that could have happened. That would be the Hanukkah of 32 AD. And we would know exactly when it happened. So the question is, are the Gospels in chronological order? The Synoptic Gospels, which are Mark, Luke, and Matthew, they seem to sometimes repeat the same story. Sometimes the story in John is in a different location or in time than the Gospel of Synoptic Gospels. In the Synoptic Gospels, sometimes the same, what appears to be the same person is called by different names, or you see a person doing the same actions twice. So we will investigate that in the next video to figure out what's going on with the confusion in the Synoptic Gospels and why a lot of them are different than the Gospel of John. Thank you. like I said, in order to determine if the feast of dedication, Hanukkah, happened right after the events of the blind man by the pool of Siloam, or maybe it's out of order. And what do the Synoptic Gospels have to say about that, or are they in order as well? We'll look at that in the next episode, next video. Now, if you are learning something or getting new insights onto the life of Jesus Christ from the work I'm doing, please like and subscribe. That will really help me out. This video, and I'll try to continue to do my best to bring you useful information. Thank you.